Hello, welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast. I'm Andrew Musgrove, joined by our chief Newcastle United writer, Lee Ryder, for a special episode. Lee was one of a few people down at the Stack in Newcastle on Tuesday evening as Newcastle United's CEO and director of football spoke to fans at a very special event. Lee, thanks for popping on. How are you doing? You well?
Yeah, I'm all good, thank you. Good night last night, and I think it was really refreshing to hear that sort of communication, which is what everyone sort of strives for. That's what everyone used to want when there was sort of previous owners there, and even since takeover, there's been times where we've been waiting for bits of information, but I thought last night was quite open and honest, and it was a good event, well put on by the club, and well attended, and well received by everyone that was there.
So we had the CEO, David Hopkinson, and Director of Football, Ross Wilson. Kind of the first time they've had the opportunity to speak to fans since their appointments over the last few months. They had plenty to say because there are kind of 3 or 4 burning questions that everyone has wanted to put to them, and they answered them openly and honestly on the training ground, on sponsorships, on the stadium, and we'll get into that in a moment. But afterwards, Lee, you got the opportunity to sit down with both of them and just got a chance to speak to them away from the crowds. How was that, and what kind of people are they first and foremost? Because I think people would be really interested to know the kind of the personalities and the feel you get for people who are ultimately running the club.
Yeah, I mean, on David Hopkinson first, it was actually the sort of second or third time I'd spoken to him, and I've had a really sort of good sort of feeling whenever I've been in his company. He speaks his mind. He doesn't shirk away from questions. He tries to provide answers. When he doesn't know the answer, he'll admit it. He doesn't try to, come across as if he knows absolutely everything, because he's said himself that he's like listening and learning as he's going along. With certain aspects of it, I don't think there's any doubt that he can run a top-notch organization. I think what he says he's learning is basically he's learning about the football club, he's learned about the people, he's learned about living in the city, and I think that's all really relevant. And rather than just trying to sort of skim over things, he will stop you and ask you certain questions, and I think that's something that requires great leadership, that you can stop and ask people things that you may not be sure on, and accept that you don't know everything, and nobody does know everything. So I think I can only see positive things with David Hopkinson. With Ross Wilson, first time I've actually met him, he got bombarded with quite a lot of questions from the national papers. So it was a little bit more difficult to get your question in, especially where we were sat at the table. Did ask one question which I can't really say at the moment because it's embargoed, but people will see the answer to that question. I think it was the question that everyone would ask him if they did. I got a short answer, but I got an answer, so you'll see that soon. But yeah, he was bombarded with questions about transfers, how much of Newcastle got to spend, have they got any money to spend, contracts, all that sort of stuff. So you will see all that unfold in the next couple of days from the embargoed section. So it was really positive. Sat around the table, good open communication, and no questions shirked.
Which is good. And just reading through some of the quotes that Ross Wilson said last night at the event at the Stack. And what I like is that he was quite modest about what he brings to the table. And he said, I'm not a super scout that will fly around the world and find the kind of the next superstars. I sit within a structure. And I thought that was quite refreshing because, this is a top job in football. The ambitions that the PIF have, and what you've got there is a man who hasn't got a massive ego running wild. He's not mis-selling something. He's not promising something he can't deliver. He's just said, look, this is what I'm good at. This is what you won't get. And this is what I can offer. So I felt they were quite refreshing quotes. But no one cares about that, Lee. What everyone really wants to know about is the stadium, because that has been on the lips of nearly every supporter for so long. And we've been waiting for that official update for quite a while. And finally, we got one of sorts on Tuesday evening, and essentially, if I'm going to paraphrase it, it was that there isn't really an update because the club aren't ready to bring you their official findings yet, which I see is a positive in some ways, as bizarre as that might sound to some, is because it's such a big decision that if they have to take a little bit longer to get it right, then I think that's a good thing. I mean, we'll get your opinion on what Dave Hopkinson had to say, but in terms of the reaction within the room, 1,000 fans hearing the answer from Dave Hopkinson, what was their reaction like?
I think it was taken well by the crowd. I don't think anyone turned up there and thought there was going to be a pinpoint presentation of, you know, the new stadium. I don't think anyone has got that. We've already had a few clues with the fact Euro 2028, Newcastle's ground in its current form will probably be what hosts that. Those, you know, 3-4 big games in the Euros. The words that I like that he used were, he said, you know, we could be talking about a renovated St James's Park. I think he did give a bit more away than no update. I think the word renovated was dropped in there. The word reimagined was dropped in there. So those were little clues to what, you know, what could lie in wait. It doesn't feel like it's definitely going to be a new stadium. It could still be potentially St James's gets rebuilt. Could be potentially a Tottenham Hotspur situation where they just basically start again. And there's no right or wrong answers here at the minute because it's all still on the table. So for me, we've all had a say on the ground, but I think you'll see a bit more from the embargoed section as well. That, you know, I personally pressed them on a couple of things. A couple of other people did. And, you know, we've already had those clues, as I say, the 2028 sort of clue. But I think there's still options at St James's Park. Not too many because we know the way the ground is structured, the East Stand and all that sort of stuff. But there are still options. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But I think what he said was we're working around the clock to get this, to move this to a different position to what it is now. And I think that's all people ask, really. So yeah, that was my take on everything. I try to be positive anyway, and I took a few of them positive words. I like the word reimagined. I like the word renovated. You know, personally, I would say 95% of me wants to stay at St James's Park anyway.
Let us know in the comments your thoughts on St James's Park and what you would like to see happen. I'll just read out some of the quotes, Lee, that you put in your piece yesterday once the event finished. He said, we're not ready to yet. I give an update. What is clear, to be at the top consistently, we need to grow revenues. That means we need world-class facilities where we can generate those revenues. St James's Park today is incredible where we sit in 2025. We need to look at other opportunities, whether renovated or reimagined. We are working on it every day. I know there is a lot of pressure. We have not made that decision. And I think he also goes on to talk about ambition, which is what we all want to hear, isn't it? This is a complex project, a project that will be the most ambitious this club has ever taken on. So that shows you why they're taking the time with it, because whatever the answer is, it's going to be a costly answer. It's also going to be one that's going to take quite a while to come to a reality. But is that what you got a sense of both at the event and speaking to him afterwards, Lee, that kind of sense of ambition, but also a man who's in place to deliver it as well, given his CV?
Yeah, I think one of the key words I mentioned as well was revenue. And until Newcastle get this stadium situation sorted out, they're going to be bringing in less revenue. They want to be in a position where they can offer fans more season tickets. So we do know that there is a way of increasing the capacity at the current ground. So that would be a way. Basically said we want to be a world-class business operation, and the only way of doing that is by increasing the revenue. And I guess the only way of increasing the revenue is by selling more tickets. So that kind of stuck with me last night. And I mean, there's almost a sense of frustration about the ground because everyone wants it to be bigger. But you know, it's since the takeover, it's kind of nothing's really changed, has it? In fact, on paper, the capacity's actually gone down because of a few modifications. So only slightly, but it's still gone down. So I think people they want more from that, but at the minute, it's a case of let's put trust into them. I mean, he spoke about trust, saying the best way to build trust is by communicating and open communication, and that's exactly what they're doing. So, you know, I think for me, if you had, say, one of these, I mean, the last one was 12 months ago. I was at that one as well. So I think if they could have these, you know, I don't know what, every 3 months, every 4 months, something like that, I think that would be very helpful.
Yeah, he said communicating with supporters will be critical. And he's obviously talking not just with the stadium, but across the board. The other talking point that always comes up alongside the stadium is regarding a training ground sponsor. And he was asked about that, and he said, we have to get the right deal. We haven't had that yet. We have to get our big block sponsors right. It is a huge opportunity here. We know how to do this. We have a good team. We need to go and get it done. Again, I mean, that's probably an answer that won't please everybody, but it is an answer which I think to those kind of, when you talk to people within the club, that's kind of the answer that's being given away in the background to why it hasn't been done yet, because they don't want to end up in a similar position potentially to how they had with Castor when the new owners came in and they found that actually the deal that had been given to Castor totally undervalued what they were actually what it would have been worth. And it's a little bit similar here, isn't it, Lee? That, you know, you could sell it for XYZ now, but in 3 or 4 years' time, it could be worth twice, 3, 4 times as much, and yet you're still got a little bit of run on a 5-year deal. So it's about getting the right deal, as he says there, for the club and making sure it is maximum value.
Yeah, and I think the last time I had an in-depth conversation with Peter Silverstone was that exactly that. They wanted to get a deal that represented value for the club. They didn't have that. They'd been offered 3 or 4 training ground sponsors, but they weren't going to be big deals, and they didn't just want to do one for the sake of doing it. They wanted to do one that was going to actually help increase the revenue. And I think if you just accept a lower deal, then you've kind of set yourself up for a lot less. The example that was used to me was Chelsea's kit sponsor, how like for large parts of last season, they didn't have a kit sponsor because they weren't getting anything that matched the value. So for me, it has to be the right deal. You want it to be something, you know, spectacular, and they are rebuilding the current training ground. So that, I mean, they're working with what they've got in that sort of side of it. We do the press conference next door now, and it's changed dramatically since, even in the last 18 months, it's changed dramatically. But it's getting bigger and bigger. You can hear the building going on while the press conference is taking place. So the current training ground is much better than it was, and you know, there is talk of pushing on to get a bigger one, and then that's when you might see the sponsor. But that doesn't rule out the current training ground getting a sponsor either.
I think, obviously, like I say, there always are the two burning questions everyone's wanted answers to. And I think what's really important is that you got a sense last night that we know these things need to be done, but we're also not going to rush it and just do it because we know there's the pressure and the want and the desire to see these things done. We're going to get it right. And I think that's quite important, isn't it? That they will get done, but they'll get done in a way that benefits Newcastle to the maximum they can do.
Yeah, and he actually said last night that, you know, if they don't have a training ground sponsor this time next year, then, you know, maybe serious questions could be asked. I actually threw that one in there. So for me, I think that's an indication that they are pushing and they're getting closer. They've had success on other fronts. I mean, you go to the club shop now, and compared to, you know, the start of the takeover, it's night and day, isn't it? It's fantastic in there. You know, you walk around other areas of the club that've been sort of really taken up to date. But then by the same token, you know, you go to somewhere like Everton at the weekend, and that's you know, that they've managed to finally get their move, and you walk around there and you were really impressed with, you know, the press facilities, the mix zone, the corporate areas of the ground, and you know, and then you compare it back to St James's Park, and there are parts of it that are very dated, and you know, it would take a big job to have a complete transformation, but you know, all options are still on the table, so we'll have to wait and see. There's so much to go at, but it feels like only still the start of the journey at the moment.
I guess it goes back to the point I made earlier in the show that if you want one man at the wheel to deliver all these big changes, then it is someone like David Hopkinson with his history that he's got with all the major you know, sporting brands that he's worked with before he arrived on Tyneside.
Yeah, I mean, his CV speaks for itself, doesn't it? But a CV is a CV until you actually meet that person. I mean, I wrote in my piece today. My piece was very much an opinion-based article on, you know, what was going on at the sort of event last night, and it reminded me, the way he was speaking, the way he was presenting his words, reminded me, you know, of Sir John Hall, of Freddie Shepherd. They spoke, they aimed big. We then, after Sir John Hall and Freddie Shepherd, we then had years of Mike Ashley and Derek Lambias and, you know, other board members, Lee Charnley, telling us what we can't do. We had 14 years of what we can't do. Now we're back of what we can do, what we can achieve. And what we can achieve is what everyone sort of dreamed of. We were all brought up on that dream, the Sir John Hall dream of being top 3 in the Premier League and top 10 in Europe. And then it just kind of like slid away. And now we've kind of got it back. So that for me, I walked out of that building and I went home and I was just full of optimism. And that's how you should be as a Newcastle United fan. You want that optimism. And we've now got it back. And there seems to be someone at the top who's prepared to push for that.
Certainly so, and it's going to be so interesting over the next few months and years to see just what he achieves at Newcastle United. You can catch up with everything that Dave Hopkinson and Ross Wilson had to say at this event, and then later in the embargoed chat with Lee and others. You can find that on our website, chroniclelive.co.uk. Thanks, Lee, for popping on and providing a recap of last night's event. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed it. Get into the comments, let us know your thoughts on anything that we've spoken about, and we'll catch you very soon.